we really have unlimited capacity. That's a fact. We actually have unlimited capacity. Our scarce resource, our number one scarce resource in the entire space, is leadership. It's not money, it's not tools, it's not technology, it's not vision, it's not ideas, it's not organizations. And by the way, we need to do all of those things. Like, all of those things are things to be done. But all of them are downstream from leadership. Our overall theory of change is that when you grow minds, you change identities. And if you can change an identity, a new worldview comes alive innately, organically, naturally within that identity. So greetings. Today's a second Big Picture Mind discussion. This is a new series of discussions I'm doing to try to apply big picture thinking in sophisticated ways to some of the areas that I think are most pressing for not only the movement, but what's going on in the world. I appreciate you all being here. It's lovely to see a lot of familiar faces and some new ones. Like I said, it looks like about 40% of people have read the Sociology of Big Pictures, which we'll talk about today and what some of its implications are in terms of what I'm advocating for. And let's dive right in. So I'm going to read the executive summary because there's a lot of density in the paper, and this gets at the core themes. Some of these things we'll skip over a little bit because in the last session, we did talk about the meta-crisis, so we can obviously go back to that if you'd like, but I don't think that's what's novel here. But that does provide important context for where we start. So the executive summary. We live in a moment of acute and profound change, a new transformation age witness to world transforming, historic, paradigmatic shifts all happening at the same time. A geopolitical great release, a techno-economic singularity, an ecological shift into the Anthropocene, a pervasive existential meaning crisis, and an epistemological shift into hyper-reality. If you don't understand some of those terms, happy to talk about them. And in the first section of the paper, I go through what each one is in brief. New capacities of human consciousness are arising with the transformation age, with the most advanced human cognition in history emerging and producing a new postmodern worldview of integrative, evolutionary neorealism, providing a credible 21st century story of wholeness and spiritual liberation. We believe humanity desperately needs what this integrative worldview can offer in the face of these co-arising seismic shifts in the human condition, which collectively represent a threatening meta-crisis, but also an opportunity to prefigure the first global unity in diversity society in human history. Yet the very movements in which the integrative worldview's consciousness is housed are tiny, fragmented, and fringe. We need to recognize that, like all knowledge systems in history, we compete for attention in a world historic manner. Here I argue for engaging in this attentional competition in a self-reflexive way, with strategies and social practices drawn from the lessons of the sociology of philosophy. I call for leaders from these movements to join an effort to convene an integrative worldview network based on a collaboration protocol that enables pursuit of a parsimonious but socially collaborative grand strategy aimed at signal amplification in order to foster the worldview's availability and attentional impact. As this worldview coheres into such a strategic ideational network, it will have the opportunity and responsibility to foster the big picture knowledge economy that can produce emancipatory knowledge and social practice for the transformation age. So fundamentally, this is an analysis of where are we as a movement and as an ideational social effort when we situate it in the historic arc of these kinds of efforts. What can we learn from the success or failure of those efforts in the past? And how do we bring that level of self-reflexivity to ourselves in order that we can meet the demands of the moment and also sort of take ourselves seriously with respect to that, that self-reflexivity, the fact that we can actually learn the lessons of history and look at ourselves and say, okay, well, then what strategy should we be employing and how can we not be doing that? I've been doing this a long time, going on, 20 years now as a leader in the space. And, the timing is right. Timing is right. As some of you may have seen from a couple of years ago when I talked about the evolution of the movement itself, big pictures have only been around for, this kind of big picture, this kind of integrated big picture, only been around for more than a century, really at the fringe, and then taken hold really in the last 50 or 60 years in terms of the construction of big integrative meta-theoretical systems. But they didn't get really socially instantiated until this millennium, really the late 90s is the first time. And then that for a decade, it was in a stage one unity, stage one identity sort of model. And then stage two, it moved into differentiation, where it moved away from the founders of those systems, spread out, lots of diversity, lots of pluralism. And then what I've argued for the last couple of years is we had like a long decade in stage one, we had a long decade in stage two, and now it's time to move into stage three and try to bring some integration together to bring these things back together and put some force behind the punch of what we're attempting to do. The responsibility that falls on us when the integrative worldview can see the world's knowledge from all cultures throughout all of history, from all the different ideological vantage points, and then develop integrated philosophical systems from that. The responsibility that's placed on us is immense to take that seriously. And the timing with the emergence of the transformation age, we are no longer in the information age. The emergence of the transformation age with a meta-crisis that we can clearly see in several different domains. There's just the timing is now, and there's so much that we can do together. There really is so much we can do together. We really have unlimited capacity. That's actually that's a fact. We actually have unlimited capacity. Our scarce resource, our number one scarce resource in the entire space, is leadership. It's not money, it's not tools, it's not technology, it's not vision, it's not ideas, it's not organizations, it's not, many things. And by the way, we need to do all of those things. Like, all of those things are things to be done. But all of them are downstream from leadership. All of them. We have a leadership, I'm going to say a leadership deficit, because I'm not convinced we do exactly, but we need to call leaders forward, and then we need to organize them, and we need a strategy for doing so. That is the thing that has occupied my attention for the last couple of years as I formed the Institute of Applied Meta-Theory and started thinking about how would we do this stage three reintegration, emergence, taking the worldview seriously, given the historic backdrop that we're against, and then what is our scarce resource and how do we go about solving it? And it occurred to me that we have to understand how movements like this succeed or don't, how big idea systems succeed or don't, at least at some basic level of fluency. which is why then I started to embark on this project to look at the sociology of big pictures and examine that. And that's really what this white paper is then designed to answer. Where do we lead from? We lead as a network. We need to build a network. We need to build a worldview network because networks beat ideas. Networks beat genius. Networks beat individuals. Networks matter. So we need to center the network in our logic. What are we attempting to do? We're attempting to build a worldview that can compete because we are in an attentional competition. And we can talk about more about what that means and how to do that. And finally, what is our overall theory of change? Our overall theory of change is that when you grow minds, you change identities. And if you can change an identity, a new worldview comes alive innately, organically, naturally within that identity. So how do you do that? You build a new knowledge economy to do it. You build the institutions, you build the systems of consciousness, the tools, the innovations, and all of these things that are able to do that. And there are ways for us to approach that. But at the core of all of it is this very sort of first question, which are the meta movements, like, can we play well together? Like, can we collaborate? Can we do stuff together to get all the wood behind an arrowhead? And that is fundamentally a political project. It's fundamentally a socio-political project of building a protocol. And by protocol, we just mean a way that we can operate together, an agreement that allows us to get more done together than we would on our own. And so really what this white paper is doing is it's laying the groundwork for an argument that I am making, not only to myself and us in the Institute, but increasingly to other leaders of other nodes in the network, saying, let me go into service to you and to the problems that you face, because, like, for those entrepreneurs on the call, the best way to get someone to adopt anything is to solve a painful problem for them. If you can solve a painful problem for people, yes, you can have values alignment, you can have vision alignment, you can have normative alignment, you can have a lot of alignment, and those things are wonderful. You have high social cohesion. But if you can solve a problem for them, then also you can get high task alignment and you can really start pulling in the same way. So my job is to begin talking to these leaders, which I already have started. And I'm already hearing themes about where these pain points are and what the limitations are, et cetera, of the things that they're facing. And so far, there's not a lot of surprises. Like, I think a lot of us are going to be encountering the same thing. And a lot of it actually has already been sort of anticipated in the paper itself in terms of what the key problems are. But we will continue that, and then we will be on to the project of seeing whether there's a way to collaborate in a deeper way. And reality is smarter than all of us, so it's like we'll read the landscape as best we can, and then we will respond. And if there is something that we can do to bring that network together in a powerful way, then we will. And if there are, there's diversity that makes it very hard and wants to stay fragmented, like it very well could, then that's also going to be learning that takes us to the next step. So either way, we win. But it would certainly be great if we were able to see the vision through. Anyway, so that's a 15-minute tee up to what really the paper said. I'm happy to walk through each section. I've got some slides to show you. I've got some graphics that I think will be kind of neat. But before I do that, let me open it up, I suppose, to initial questions or comments or things that are coming up for you so that we can open the space a bit.
Rob and everybody, thank you for convening this. I read the white paper. I'm a humanities nerd. It was like reading something in a foreign language I kind of half understand, but I'm thrilled. What I would like to do, what I'm here today, is to look at points 3 and 4 of your grand strategy. They are number 3 was tell a true, more deeply meaningful story, and that's the creative arts, writing, entertainment, the arts, entertainment, popular culture. I see that as part of bringing our beautiful vision out of our beautiful ghetto into the mainstream via the arts. Some of these are already happening. I'm thinking of Marco Morelli's Cosmos Co-op, which I only just discovered. And I want to make sure that gets plugged into your whatever system you build here. We've also got various integral creative writers support pod through ILEA, Integral Leaders in Action. There are a lot of nodes out there that already exist that if we plug them into this number, and your point number 4, build an autopoietic network, a network that builds itself bottom up. I want to make sure that the creative arts and culture get plugged into this system you're building. That's what I
Yeah,
am
thank
here
you.
to say.
Thank you. So I'll say a couple of comments about this. So first of all, on a true, more deeply meaningful story, there is a transcendent story of wholeness that comes out of this worldview that solves a massive problem and is probably our killer app, if you want to just sort of put it crudely. Like our killer app is the fact that the integrative worldview has a credible 21st century transcendent story of evolutionary non-dual wholeness that hundreds of millions of people are in desperate search of and don't know it or don't know how to encounter it. And it is coming online. It is definitely coming online. So it's deeply spiritual. Like our project is deeply spiritual, and it is a return to understanding who we are in a cosmos that is not just uncaring. Like the evolution emerges into greater value in consciousness and complexity, and that there is something fundamentally valuable occurring in the universe. That is a really, really powerful and important story. And that's at the heart of that. The second component of this around storytelling is we suck at storytelling. Like everybody I've talked to, and certainly we've agreed in our own kind of field or in our own domain, we're not very good at this. We're not very good at telling the story. Like I think we have some of the components to it. I think you know, on our good days, we might be able to tell a decent story, but we need to get a lot better at storytelling. And there is going to be there at the Institute, when I think about that grand strategy, I think about how do you systematize the storytellers at scale? Like how do you really start to put some new stories out in a significant way? And that is one of the dimensions of the strategy. Um,
We need to tell better stories.
we need to tell better stories, and we need to tell stories better. Uh,
And that's the role of the creative, the upper left and lower left side. If we could plug them into your very lower right approach
yeah.
and mutually empower each other, we will
And
go
so here's the other
places.
thing I was gonna mention is that I think too, when you look at the meta movements, you see, and this is all a little bit tentative because obviously I'm doing this in real time as we talk to people and we look at sort of the landscape. But there does seem to be a typology of the meta movement that's roughly the big three. Like you've got us who tend to be cognitive and philosophical. We under labor on the behalf of integrative meta theory and big picture knowledge systems. Really important because in a lot of ways that's the base of the pyramid to not get the philosophy wrong. In a lot of ways, what I think where the backlash to the pluralist worldviews because their philosophy got misunderstood and got a little bit backwards. So getting the philosophy right is important. Um, and so, but that is a typology. In the lower left, you do get more of the cultural and artistic expressions. And then in the lower right, you get more of the practical and political movements. So, and you know, obviously everyone is in all three. It would not be fair to say that they're not, but each one seems to have a little bit of a flavor. Like Game B seems to be really focused more on the practical, building the new way of living and the decentralized, like cooperative economy, et cetera, that you'd find down in this area. We have tended to be in the spiritual and the psychological and the philosophical and the cognitive. And then you get metamodernism, which has been, at least seemingly, that comes out of the cultural studies and what have you, and some of the more artistic sensibilities. So just noticing that there's going to be those kinds of differences and those kinds of flavor, maybe strengths and emphases is important, because our job then is to see what form of integration can exist that gives everybody a place to sort of live within that. And what does that look like? And the key, of course, in any kind of protocol is it's got to be integratively plural. Really emphasis on the plural, like a tons of freedom for diversity and everybody to be who they really want to be, but some core that actually integrates. And if we remember what integration does, or it's an organizational form. What actually evolves in the universe is organizational forms. And so an integration is an organizational form that allows for everybody to say, yeah, that's sort of like who we are. And this is why the minimal integrative worldview, the step one of the grand strategy, which is, can you define what the core seed crystal of the integrative worldview stands for in such a way that it calls to people? They say, yeah, that's actually me. I can express it in many different diverse ways, but yeah, that's kind of what I'm standing for in the world. If you don't have that, if you don't have something that can act as both a positive filter that is attractive and also a negative filter, then you haven't actually distinguished yourself from the other worldviews out there. And that's really important to notice. Like, it has to also act as a negative filter where there's a difference between what we're doing and some of the other worldviews. And this is not, the good news is there's a lot of work that's already been done on this, and the Institute has a task force that is actually already underway assembling what this seed crystal would look like. And I could say more about that. So thank you for the question, Karen. Marilyn.
Okay, hi. I just went to a town hall meeting in my community in rural Virginia. It's a very big MAGA country, but this was all Democrats. And I noticed they're very smart people there, but it was a lot of negativity about the other guy. And I really didn't feel like I walked away with a way to help them or to know how they were going to lead. So what I'm looking for is anything I can read or listen to or learn more about what you're talking about so that I can be a better person in those meetings to turn it into this transformational moment. And maybe they're not ready. I don't know. I just felt like I could be an agent of this in a town hall meeting in rural Virginia, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and in a lot of ways, it's a really good example of where the rubber hits the road in terms of the practical requirement. Um, and there's a lot to say about this, which could take us pretty far afield. But there's no question that one of the things that has to emerge from us, the work we do as a movement, is attend to the political, and attend to the political in a really direct and concrete way. And so that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is that when you do the integrative worldview, as we know, is integrative. I mean, it's not asking anybody to change as such. It's not demonizing prior worldviews. Quite the opposite, actually. It can hold them, hopefully, with dignity, celebrate what they do and how they operate and what they stand for. And if you read the paper, it's like what they care for, to use Karabi's sort of framing on this. I mean, what are they taking care of? And these worldviews are taking care of things in an important way. And so that's something we have to take very seriously. That does not mean that we can't compete with them, because we have to understand the difference between domination competition and growth competition. And what we are doing is we are engaging in growth competition. We want to compete to set up better structures of growth in society, which means we want to win the competition, because our claim is that our worldview is better, not just for us, but also for them, because we want to use integrative knowledge, integrative ethics, integrative modes of knowing, being, and doing, and leading to help overcome the demi-realities, the blind spots, and the pathological moments of some of those other worldviews. And that is something that I think we can do, actually. I think we can do that without ignoring that ours comes with our own, by the way. Like, we can see risks in our own, and they're real. And I'm sure that whatever worldview comes after ours will be healing ours, healing the damages we create and the blind spots we've got. So that would be very, we can just expect that. But we're not there yet. That's somebody else's problem way in the future. Thanks for the question. Tripod, nice to see you.
Hey, Rob, great to see you. Great to see everyone. Thanks so much. Super special, obviously very, very, very relevant topic. Kind of zooming in, I haven't had the time to read the white paper yet. It's like on my computer ready to go, and I'm excited about it though. I'm trying to think again and again about what's the lowest hanging fruit here. Like, how do you create these arches or these transdisciplinary, like integrative skeletal structures, which it seems to be kind of where this is all oriented towards. And part of the lowest hanging fruit I see is one, a dispositional or an attitudinal shift. And it seems like at this integral level, call it teal or yellow and into turquoise, that it's no longer enough at that level or layer, or whatever you call it, cosmic address, to just be about all of us. It's not just me or us or all of us, because that all of us has to get really, really, really big once we get into integral meta-modeling. Once the power of being able to really specifically zoom in to very particular locations of cosmic addresses, at that point we have a lot of power to help them and hurt them. And there has to be some view that's chosen by me, by the participant, to never hurt the other cosmic address, no matter what they are. MAGA, liberal, blah, 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 alien, three eyes, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There has to be some self-chosen, I will do this for all of us in a very big, like much more capital K cosmically way. So that's an attitudinal thing that you can just turn on. You don't have to believe in it so much, but you can actually turn it on. And there's a bunch of wisdom traditions that have different practice methodologies already that can help turn that on and grow that capacity to be on. That's an upper left thing. Another upper left thing in the Wilberian dynamics is like what I see is it seems unavoidable at that layer of metacognitive development, this integrative, that it has to start recognizing some kind of a state that we could call absolute truth, however that's flavored or textured according to whatever cosmic address. But like Sean S. Bjornhagen says, like, you have to track one, what's getting worse, two, what's getting better, and three, what is unchanging. And if there's not that third, what is unchanging component, which is called absolute by any other name, pick the name, like that's healing balm for the extreme relative position that's targeted every single thing that dressed up as absolute universality and just like systematically denied it. That actual state of absolute unchangingness, whatever it is, however we get into it, seems like it's also an essential thing for this not to go wrong in a really, really big way and just reproduce an unhealthy, so preemptively not produce the very unhealthy version of this next level supercharged, powerful, integrative, meta modeling. So anyway, those are the two, the attitudinal shift, and also that always track the unchanging as well as what's getting better and what's getting worse. Those seem like they're kind of essential bedrock things that'll just have to be in the mix. So thanks, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's important to notice that when anything comes into being, when anything comes into the world and evolves, it has to do so in a really robust four-quadrant way that's evolutionary and emergent, and it becomes increasingly robust, increasingly institutionalized, increasingly turned into tools that embody social practice in the tools. The knowledge systems and the education lineages and the stories that are told, like all of that occurs, right? All of that becomes more and more instantiated and substantial as anything emerges that is fundamentally up leveled in terms of a reorganization of a worldview that was prior, and then now something new is emerging. And so the one of the key things that I have always felt like was just a real power of the integrative worldview is almost in some ways the simplest, which is an ethical commitment to include otherness. Like the moment that becomes an ethical commitment that you take seriously, it is radically transformative to yourself and everything else you do, because you can't encounter a perspective that you don't kind of feel obligated to find a place in yourself around. And that's true then at every level. It's true in terms of the institutions you see in the laws. And so that ethical commitment of, so these integrative meta theories are fundamentally ethical. They're fundamentally meta-ethical in terms of that commitment to a service to wholeness, a service to actually trying to put yourself into a vertical developmental space of perspective taking that allows yourself to become big enough to hold the otherness you're finding in any situation. But Drog was exactly right. Like you can't just do it as a cognitive thing. If you have a compassion practice, it makes it a hell of a lot easier. Like if you actually have the practices that come out of the traditions, all of a sudden it supercharges that ethical commitment in a way that, first of all, makes it possible, and second of all, it makes it just a lot easier. It makes it a lot more rich. You're just the beneficiary of it. So again, these things co-arise, and this is the sort of institutionalization of these training systems and knowledge availability and lineages and all the things that we have to do, and that, by the way, are being done. But I think if we look at it again at a meta level and say, okay, well, how can we do it just a hell of a lot better, a lot bigger scale, a lot more resources, a lot more leadership, and take that seriously, then you start to see a map with a million things to do. There's just so much to do. And that's kind of where we are. But thank you, Drogba.
But if you have that, and real quick, if you have that openness of perspective, that gigantic inclusivity, you'll start to trust yourself better. You'll self-track and honor those different layered cosmic addresses that come together in that bigness or that openness, the wholeness. And that means you'll learn to trust others better. And then you'll have the whole network school of fish swimming together a little more easily, and be able to actually put trust in a leader who's responsible to that network. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that perspective. Gabby?
Hello, Rob.
Hi.
My question is, some you were already asked by Karen. The network, you're talking about the network. Do you have an idea how big is that network? Did you identify the nodes already?
Um,
I'm trying to see what stage you are, or how advanced the whole idea is.
Yeah. Well, it's a kind of question like how that like the network is always changing and growing. And so there's no final answer to that question in a way, but there has been a lot of work that's been done on mapping the meta networks for the last few years. There's been a bunch of, and I referenced some of that. Brandon Norgard's been involved with that. Claudia Meglin's been involved with it. There's actually Joe Lightfoot's been involved with that. There's been a whole bunch of people that have actually mapped a lot of what's going on in the liminal web, and Danielle Johnson. So they are getting their hands around the fact that there is this emergent teal thing happening. Now, there's also within that a lot of emergent green thing happening too, and I think there's conversation that we have to be aware of in terms of that. But yeah, that network is it's growing, it's emergent, and it does seem like there are some key nodal leaders amongst that. But my view is I'm going to talk to anybody. I mean, anybody who I think is really sort of standing for what I interpret to be the integrative worldview that we're attempting to cohere on. I want to talk to. I want to see I want to hear what their pain points are.
Okay, and then you talked about the leadership deficit in leadership capacity. Now I think you're looking and probably are talking about the leadership at that level of meta movements level. And then I know, I'm not even supposing, you will need leadership at many other layers to help you organize the map.
Yeah,
Project
100%.
management, a lot of other things. And
Yep.
then in relation to that, I really read and had to learn a lot in your paper. But then you said, given that we do have agency and we've chosen the path we have, shouldn't we get out of the car and push? Okay, so my question is how and where I can push, and probably all the people in these calls and many, many others. So don't forget that apart from the philosophers and the meta thinkers, you will need an army of task leadership.
Yes.
And that has to be organized and started to think and coalesce in the same time. You cannot wait to have your network leaders, and then because it takes too much time. So that's an other managerial, I don't know, task that can be done by people who are, you call them light teal or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Light something.
Yeah.
You already have them. And
Well, yeah, please let you finish.
now just make a call and you'll be surprised, and then you can see who is really fit and who not.
Yeah. So the number one thing that keeps me up at night is not that we don't have voltage to apply to some of the ideas that we're putting out here, or I've said for a while, like we have like $2 or $3 billion of spiritual capital in this network. And I mean that as a kind of a metaphor for like, we have a lot of spiritual energy. We have a lot of meaning energy. I know that. The problem is, it's not a problem. It's just a characteristic of the situation. Like in order to apply voltage, you better have your wiring laid down. Otherwise, you just get short circuits. And so I've said this for a couple of years, finding the right way to organize that matrix of energy is the hardest part of this entire thing. And so the leadership challenge occurs at a lot of different levels. And I will, in a couple of minutes, I'll show you some slides about how we're thinking about this. But I'm absolutely painfully aware that how do you organize a matrix organization for a movement that is able to release massive amounts of energy and talent, but also kind of go somewhere? Like, that's not just completely chaotic and totally like nobody singing from the same song sheet. That's the hard part, right? Getting that balance right, and that requires organizing in a certain kind of way that frankly most places don't do really well. Like it's a hard problem for a good reason.
Yeah, I get it. I just know because I'm a collector of managerial collaborative concepts. I know
Yeah.
of a very smaller scale how you change the Ontario health sector. And I can send to whoever tells me where to send that. And it's old, it's 15 years ago. And meanwhile, it got better. It's called the constellation model. And I'm sure there are other models in Europe, and probably somebody studying those models, organizing managerial models, we can create something like a Lego without having to reinvent the wheel. And
Yeah.
use
Please,
it for
please,
small
please send it
things.
on, Gabby. Thank you very much. Dan, please.
Yeah, to build on what you folks were just talking about, I've been involved with Integral since, I don't know, over 20 years, but mostly out here in the hinterlands of California. And but I'm involved in the resource management world, sustainable resource management, which really is a very grounding process, but trying to bring integral principles and management into that. And I am not finding those principles in just, the integral Boulder community and our extensive network now, but in other areas, notably pro-social, which is integrated between psychology and education and science and evolution, but also human energy, which is part of that movement. And at the core of that work is the governance issues attended to in common pool resource management. For those of us who've been in the environmental industry, in my case, my entire adult life, the tragedy of the commons was considered to be one of the big problems. Also limits to growth, also the population bomb, and also the whole environmental movement, which has kind of run aground, and we've kind of reverted back to, the primacy of the oil industry right now. And so we get to deal with what didn't this take hold? And one of the cores to the common pool resource management is Elinor Ostrom, who got the Nobel Prize for her work in common pool resource management, which is part of pro-social. So there's a lot of models out there, as Gabby was mentioning, in the health industry and the environmental industry. I just joined a worldwide group on the design school for regenerative world, which is, creating hubs that are bioregionally focused. I'm here in North Bay, but they have them all over the world. So I do agree that all of these groups exist, all of the communities of practice. I work in a world of bringing together private sector, public sector, nonprofits, education, and so forth. And I think the 8 core design principles of common pool resource management is apropos to the work that we're trying to do in Integral Leaders in Action, because it's leaders of multiple disciplines that all have to interface according to, body, mind, and spirit. Don't forget about the body, because we're still in human bodies, even though that may be transitioning to silicon-based intelligence forms as opposed to carbon and water-based, which we are, our physical bodies. So it's happening, but I think that network can be and will be energized. I don't think you need to put a lot of energy into it, to use your electrical metaphor. I think it can all happen at room temperature, just like our physical bodies do a lot of covalent chemistry at room temperature, thanks to the miracle of biological catalysts, i.e. enzymes, whereas oil refineries have to operate at high temperature and therefore are very crude relative to the biology and the chemistry that's going on in each of our physical bodies. So
Hey,
I
Dan,
think it's there.
if I could
Yeah.
interrupt you, we still have a lot to get through. So
Yeah. So thank you. I just
comment.
wanted to posit that. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. I mentioned Elinor Ostrom's work on CPRs in the paper. And I think there's a lot to learn there. The one that I've been most impressed with, probably because somebody did a TL analysis of it, was
Yeah.
the internet and the IETF, which they've been running since the 60s. And so they have a whole model of how they've built a bit of a collaborative protocol on that and the organizational structure. It's really pretty profound and very cool. But again, more work to be done, I think, from our community about what does that sort of collaborative protocol mean, like how does it look, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of these things are, ours is a lot more, I think, in a lot of ways, maybe more complicated than others, just because it is so diverse in terms of its various landscapes. Molly, I'm going to get to you in just a moment. I want to take a moment, though, to show something that's relevant to something I pointed out in the paper around steering crisis. I created this graphic because I just thought it'd be an interesting way to show what the emergence looks like for these things. And so we have these civilizational steering crises that we've talked about as part of the meta-crisis, these 5. And if we look at this as a timeline on the lower or in the bottom here, the pain of reorganization is much higher than the pain of not solving. And this, you give humans enough pain, they get motivated. We get pretty focused when we're under enough pain. And what happens over time, of course, is that the pain of not solving something, if it's a genuinely structural problem, is that it grows over time. And so at some point, the pain of not solving starts to exceed the pain that's required to reorganize systems. And the pain of not solving is directly related to the worldview limitations here. So the worldview limitations of your current worldviews are driving the pain that's being encountered. And of course, the entire world's built on prior philosophy. And then, of course, there was at one point new prior philosophy. And then what happens is the first thing to emerge when you have these steering crises is new philosophy begins to emerge. The humanity tends to innovate from the philosophers downwards, which is pretty cool. And so the worldview limitations start to drive the motivation where new philosophy starts to emerge. And as it does, then a new worldview begins to emerge. And that new worldview begins to create a little bit of cognitive surplus. And cognitive surplus here can be just understood as a way of seeing the problem that makes it tractable that the prior worldviews couldn't make it. So all of a sudden, the cognitive surplus is making the existing problems tractable, but the cognitive surplus is still too small relative to the steering crises. And then in the emergence, as that cognitive surplus grows, and it eventually outstrips the size of the steering crisis, you start to see a new civilizational operating system come online with new sense-making, new identities, new stories, new structures, and new institutions. We can also, interestingly, say that same chart, you can also look at it through, if you're familiar with the adaptive cycle that I used in The Great Release, you can also look at it through a complex adaptive systems lens and say, okay, you've got this growth part of the cycle. You then go into a stagnation or exploitation part of the cycle, and then you go into a breakdown or release. And it tends to be when things are starting to get really ugly, where you get breakdown, and then what happens is you get emergent reorganization and then growth again into a new cycle. Now, where we are, I would guess, is about right here. And what I'm arguing for is we need to be preparing for right here. We are here. The work to do is to prepare for this reorganization. But I think that's one way to envision where we are. You can see, for example, the whole rise of reaction, right? Global reaction is on the ascend all through the Western Alliance, and it's driving the Great Release because of that. And it's, in a lot of ways, it's going to be the best tailwind we've ever got. I've been telling people for a while now, Trump is our best friend. He's our best friend. He is really, really catalyzing system breakup and capital, not financial capital, but sort of resource capital inside of the world system breakup. He's breaking up the monopolies of that. I mean, he's doing it in an idiotic way, obviously, but nevertheless, he's doing it because the complex system is adapting to what it needs. It needs higher resilience in the face of a whole bunch of contradictions and imbalances that are in the world system. And so that's shattering all of the resource overconnectedness that exists, and it's laying the groundwork for the reorganization that's coming. Typically, these things require world wars. And so, in some ways, it's not surprising that we're going through a little bit of a political process that's going to, yield a country that looks like it's gone through a world war, even though it hasn't yet. Let's dive into this next slide, which I think is going to get into the actual then, like, a bit of the strategy itself. Hopefully it's not too dry. So at the core, the paper was called, well, actually it wasn't called, subtitle, Network Strategy for a 21st Century Worldview. So this is network strategy for an integrative worldview. And at the core of this is the mission. Obviously, there's a lot of different ways to say this. But I think this is not a bad way to say it. The mission is to foster an integrative civilization that can take care of humanity in the fullness of who we really are. That comes right out of some of the language I use in the paper around what do I think the integrative worldview does that makes it distinct. What does it take care of? So at the core is that mission. Now, the theory of change, as I said, is to build integrative people who embody the mind and identity of an integrative worldview. And the grand strategy is to cohere an integrative worldview movement to compete for the 21st century, to set in place the enabling conditions that allow for 1,000 flowers to bloom in a lot of different ways across a lot of different vectors. And that's now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how that grand strategy then has these strategic vectors, right? So far, so good? All right. So we've talked about a bunch of these, but I'll just go through them. So the first is to tell a deeper story. We've got to get better at telling a deeper story better. And I believe that will offer pathways to new identities in a way that is very, very valuable for people. Instilling the worldview, it has to do with us understanding what is at the core of it. It's realist. There are real causal structures in the world, that reality is layered. It's evolutionary. It evolves and emerges. It's enactive. Epistemology is enactive. It's epistemologically relative. It's developmentally relative. It's transparent, so it's methodologically transparent. It can make its methods and its validity claims object in a way that allows for a really fully dimensionalized way of encountering reality and transacting amongst truths and validity claims in a way that does justice to the complexity and the nuance of occasions. It's valuable. We've talked about that before, that it's intrinsically valuable. It's visionary. It's concretely utopian. It means it has a vision of where things might go, but in a way that is sort of concretely statable. And finally, it's emancipatory. So it is aimed at social emancipation, personal liberation, freedom, fullness. Now, this all gets a bit philosophical, which is fine, but like that is the base of the pyramid that's important. Embrace huge problems. This is an important component of a strategy. Like one of the things that Collins points out in the Sociology of Philosophies is that, and I got to admit, I learned a lot from this because I kind of got it backwards, which I think probably other people would too. You'd think that really, really good intellectual solutions that are kind of holistic and have it all figured out, that they would be the ones that get adopted. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Those don't leave enough space for other people to energize the solutions within the problem landscape, and so they never get adopted. Like people don't care about them. So it's a really interesting thing where we actually have to do something a little bit paradoxical, which is embrace the huge problems that we have in our own thinking. Like, oh, here's a big blind spot. Like we don't know really well how to ethically handle vertical stage models inside of developmental systems in a particular way. We've done a bit of it, but like there's a lot more to do there. That's a problem. We can embrace that, and there's a whole generation that could work on that. I mean, there's problem after problem after problem that we can get into, but what it does is it energizes the problem landscape by steering people to key transformational dilemmas. Foster network relationships. This is about building the network and building it face to face. The interaction ritual chains, the emotional energy, the cultural capital, cooperative impact across the network. By the way, all this stuff may seem a little meta, and it is, but that's because this is a big strategy. It's a meta strategy. Like this will. There are probably 24 initiatives that we have that hang off all of these components that are thinking about how do we concretely then move into action around these things. New journals, new conferences, new blockchain stuff, new religious and spiritual projects. But this becomes a map by which we can kind of help to organize some of those efforts and then put out calls to like, here's something we're thinking about. Do we have leaders out there that are willing to get involved? Compete for attention, we talked about. Compete explicitly and strategically for worldview prevalence. Build powerful tools. Most good emergent stuff's got tools that go with it. And there's a lot, I think, that AI actually gives us in this domain that will yield a lot of fruit over time, I think. Deliver concrete innovations. At the end of the day, from the point of view of a practical, like how does this stuff land in the world, it's really along this vector. A lot of this stuff here, this is all inside baseball. Like a lot of this stuff is kind of like the stuff that the network needs to do for its own health. But if you say, well, where do we show up in the world? It's really around how do we show up with concrete solutions that can do new things socially, legislatively, ecologically, technologically, leadership-wise, et cetera. We're not that great at this, actually. And so we have an entrepreneurial challenge here. And then finally, enable legacy impact. And it's to make a very explicit call to donors that might be remembered as the Medicis of the 21st century. Like show up. If you have money, this is the most important game on the planet. So with that as a backdrop, let's see if there's anything else I want to show you. I think that's it. So we got 20 minutes left for any questions, commentary, discussions. I don't know what's going on in chat. Hey, Brad.
Rob, that was a very nice graphic, and I really appreciated your challenge of showing up too. One of the things I know that you're interested in is the educational approach. And I kind of saw the educational aspect underlying many of those arrows in your big model. So, you know, from instilling a new worldview to approaching huge problems. You know, so a large part of what we need to do, it seems like, is, you know, educate the populace to the possibilities that a more integral worldview can offer in bringing solutions to the meta-crisis and the lack of meaning and all that type of thing. So I was wondering if you might address some of the educational possibilities you're envisioning.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, ultimately, I've said this in, I think in the last discussion, and I've said it many, many times with respect to the Institute, that ultimately what we're on about is transformative education. Um, because every system you're going to go into, every innovation you do at some level has got to be transformative. And it's often education sits at the core of it, what it's actually trying to do. And so, yeah, transformative education is key. We've got several initiatives that we've got on the whiteboard. I think we need to build the Khan Academy for the integrative worldview. It needs to be free, it needs to be worldwide, and it needs to be the most powerful resource for integrative education anywhere. I think we need, and again, these may or may not be mutually exclusive. These are just things that we believe are important. I think we need also a vertical leadership academy that does the best of breed vertical leadership development. And it has to really integrate all of what we know about real vertical leadership and then make that available in whatever wide dissemination way is able to get very seriously talented and skillful leaders to emerge with the altitude that can meet the complexity of the world as we find it, and as I said, change the identities in the meantime. That is a project that needs to be taken on, and I am committed to at least trying to seed an incubation process for getting that underway. And you can just go down the line, right? You can go down the line. Okay, we need a major education effort here. We need a major education effort here, et cetera.
I really appreciate what you are saying in the vertical transformational process. It needs to be a full spectrum approach. And one of the things I've always felt is that you just kind of need to educate people. You know, pedantic approach is just a tool to let people know of their own possibilities, because usually when truth is speaking that is inherent in a human being's psyche, they will recognize it. And I think that was one of the things that Ken's work always appealed to all of us, is that he would just say things and we went, hey, that absolutely rings true. And so in a certain sense, we need to just, you know, put it out there so people can access it. And as the younger generation grows up with it, it actually generates a new world for them to operate from. So I'm fully behind what you're pointing to.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you mentioned that last part, because we talk about this a lot internally. And I've said it before, and I will admit that we're a bit tentative on it. Like it is a little bit of a live debate. Ultimately, we think what we are going after here in terms of our theory of change is the cognitive elites. I think what we're doing here is fundamentally about the cognitive elites, but I want to qualify that by saying, on the one hand, we want to go after the leaders, we want to go after the cognitive elites. What we're not trying to do is transform all of the prior worldviews, populations to this one. That's not what we're trying to do, because I don't think it's realistic, and I don't think that's the right way to go about this. And I think it misunderstands development. What we are trying to do is put a signal out for those who are ready for something different to opt in and have a really powerful experience of what that can look like and the educational systems that can be associated with that journey if they are so ready. We know a lot about what the typological characteristics of people in this room are and all around this movement. They tend to be, and I've probably said this, so forgive me, but I'll keep saying it. Probably above average IQ, has had a spiritual opening or awakening of some kind, relatively high openness to experience. And so there's a lateralization to their knowledge process typologically in the brain that allows for connections across disparate sort of concepts. And what else? That's probably enough. Like that's a set of people that tend to opt into, and they've asked themselves big picture questions for a long time. They've always had a big picture question thing. So that's a group of people who are out in the world, and we need to obviously put the sort of bat signal out to support them. But ultimately, I do think we're on about a cognitive elite theory of change. And the asterisk is also talk to the younger generation, because as we said in the last one, like if you can talk to Zoomers, their early career, their early life, they can get a sense of what their trajectory looks like, and they can steer towards that as a hopeful, valuable, possible trajectory of their whole life course that is super powerful. And we've recently brought on a bunch of very killer leader Zoomers into the Institute, who I'm going to basically say, let's figure out how you help to spread this message amongst your generation. James.
Thank you, Rob, for your great work and for the paper. I've read it. It's fantastic intellectually and philosophically and in terms of framing things. One comment I think you may want to consider is, I think a lot of your thinking comes from what you have called an alchemical stage, and it risks going over the head of even some of us integral thinkers. But to me, the main thing that's going on right now is urgency. The meta-crisis is not just about what we think and how we think. It's also in everything. It's in our life support systems in nature around us that provide for our ability to live. It's in our social systems. It's in how we get energy and how we do transportation and what we think and feel in our real lives. And to me, Eros is calling for this integral community to stand up and have an impact in the real world now. And in order to do that, I think this community has to tackle some of the real problems in ways that are visible to the outside world, not just conversations between ourselves, but things that others can see who are not a part of this community. Like, could there be think tanks that tackle real world problems like energy or climate change or transportation or money economics, so that we're offering some sort of input into the real world that people can see and interact with, and that we're communicating with people not at an integral level, but at a level that they can relate to, no matter what their own cosmic address is.
Yeah.
And you've said it in your paper, providing an integral vision. If we could wave our magic wand and pink sparks flew and there was a critical transition, more than 10% of the people are at integral, and we could make the world the way we wish it was, what would that world look like?
Yeah.
When somebody looks out of the window, what does the city look like? When they flip that light switch, where does the power come from? When they go across town, how do they get from one place to the other? I think we need to paint pictures of of what the integral worldview looks like that other people can see, that's not behind our curtain.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. On the starting from the end, so we have on our game plan to do there's a whole vector around concrete utopia and visions. And again, this is a leadership thing. I need to find a leader who can run the concrete utopian project so that that person can then formulate what are the 12 to 15 concrete utopian visions that then they go out and find 12 to 15 leaders in the verticals or disciplinary areas to provide credible visions of where those domains go. So we know what we agree with you. I agree with you that that's important, but it's always a matter of like, I mean, we're doing this as a finite group of people with a finite amount of resources, and constantly every single thing that we do requires a really, really great leader to show up and join us to take on these kinds of projects. But yes, the Concrete Utopia project, I think is going to be very cool. And we do have some examples of it. Zach Stein did a nice job with education in a time between worlds in one of the chapters in that to show what some of the education might look like, the paideia that I mentioned in the paper. So there are credible ways to do that, and then we need to socialize it. So just putting it on paper is one thing, but then you need a socialization function, which is probably on the web and otherwise to disseminate it. As far as your first comment, the entire institute was designed to institutionalize what you just said. We look at a given area, a given context, and we say, that's the context to operate in within that frame of reference. And so go and create an integral, take an idea, turn it into an integrative innovation or a toolkit or a program that can serve that context. No integral language, no integral people required like in the police department or in the K through 12 school or in the legislative policy, like whatever it is. You serve that context in terms of that context. And again, that's an initiative that's got to be led by a leader who gets deep within that context, has subject matter expertise, is able to understand where the transformational fertility of that context is. And what the Institute of Applied Meta-Theory is trying to do is institutionalize that set of initiatives across all these different domains. Each one requires a leader, and each one requires a leader who's capable of not just the big picture thinking, but then they have to be enough of a social entrepreneur to go create an innovation, develop, call customers, get the thing sort of launched, et cetera. Because our change pipeline goes from an idea to an initiative to an institution. Ultimately, nothing would make me happier than all of the Institute of Applied Meta-Theory ideas that we have that have then turned into initiatives to become standalone institutions. So now you have the Institute of Integrative Policing. You have the Institute of, I don't know, integrative high school education or civic education or whatever. Like that is the kind of thing that we're hoping to do, but it requires really good leaders. Like you have to have some entrepreneurship. You have to be able to think about the world in terms of engineering and what the solutions are, what's the nature of the problem, business models. Like that's a set of capabilities that are tricky. So we're setting up our own internal incubator to try to help some of these folks to do that, because we have to then create our own training and institutionalization sort of vertical development processes. None of this is easy. Like all of this is really, really, really hard. And it takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort. And, but we're making a lot of progress. The good news is we're making a lot of progress. We've got a lot of people who are showing up. We've got hundreds of people who are in line to join the Institute, and we are beginning to get some donor support, which is nice. And so the flywheel is turning. So that's the good news. But this stuff ain't easy.
Great, thank you. I would encourage you to just pick a couple of them and go for it, and let it come together around a real effort rather than trying to figure out everything beforehand. Like put out a call for leadership in a couple of selected areas and actually push those projects forward as rapidly as possible and learn along the way. But thank you for everything. You're amazing.
Oh, well, thank you. Danny.
Okay, thank you, Rob, and thank you, everyone. I'll try to be quick here, be mindful of time. Joined Integral naked, I guess it was, in 2003. Still remember that little inaugural card. Trained as an Integral coach through Integral Coaching Canada, and I think, Rob, you and I, last time I saw you was at the Loft event with
cool.
Charma.
Back in 2017, yeah.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. So I'm going to be brief here. Obviously, there's different levels to play at. Admittedly, I still need to read the paper. I'm interested in possibly playing at different levels. But what I've done is I've rolled out some group coaching at yoga studios where there's space available at different times. And so I can just use the space, tap into a new group. And often there's 20 or 30-year-olds. So even on a grassroots level, it was interesting to have one of the teachers pop up and say, hey, I ran across this worldviews model, and I don't know what model it was, but I know I can give her something like integral spirituality and kind of bring her into that fold because she's ready for it. And she started talking with her boyfriend about it. So there's clearly high leverage points that you've mapped out here in the scheme, but I also just wanted to say it's nice to be able to do that. And like my son's 21, so he'll have parties at the house, and to engage with the youth at various times. It's just, trying to model, if you will, the embodied part of it and create some interest, and then just kind of like usher them along their way and maybe point to the integral work has been a real treat. So I just wanted to add that to this group. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah, we need somebody to write the book for Zoomers. And I don't know if it has to be a Zoomer, but we need somebody to write the book for Zoomers saying that you have an awesome life ahead of you and here's why. And you have a choice. You have agency in this, and the world doesn't suck. It can, but it doesn't have to. And that book certainly needs to get written. The other thing you mentioned, which is really important, every time we think of an initiative, we're immediately thinking about distribution. So when you look for transforming institutions, that's one way to do it. Or you can do an institutional overlay where you're going into pre-existing institutions and using them for distribution of new ideas. Your yoga studio example is a perfect example. And we're often thinking about that. Like, how do you create a protocol or a toolkit or a program or something that could then get distributed amongst all the existing institutional infrastructure that's already out there in any field to solve problems for them. The thing is, you solve problems, people will adopt it. Like, that's it. Like, this is where we got to get a lot better at entrepreneurship. You start solving problems, people will start adopting your stuff. So yeah, thanks for that comment.
Rob, let me just say one other thing. There's lots of examples, obviously, but I couldn't help but think about what Stephen Covey did across governments and in schools as just one example of how he had leaders do that. Kind of to your point, how's that get lit up? Thank you.
Yep, exactly. Thanks. Marjorie?
Hello there. Yeah, I haven't read the paper yet, but I am planning on reading it for sure. I've been following your work for a long time, Rob, and great respect for your work. I put some comments into the chat. I think I'm just going to try to find those and read them if I can. It's just easier for me to do it that way. So I said something like, well, I'll just say the last comment I put, because you were talking about world wars. And I think we're in a war right now, for sure. And the assumption is that the good guys are going to win the war. And that's not necessarily, there's no guarantee at all. And with Trump in there, I think, yes, he's breaking down all the systems, but from my perspective, he has no intention or no concern at all about rebuilding for the good. And so, I think what it's requiring us to do then is to engage at those lower levels right now. And in the war, we have to actually tap into our lower levels of instinctive survival and fighting for the good, true, and beautiful, and fighting against the enemy. Because if the bad guys win, so to speak, then all of our efforts and all of our desires and the urge for new things to emerge probably will have to go underground.
Mm.
And so it seems like it feels a little bit premature. Like right now, the energies need to be and actually engaging in the transformational alchemical process of actual doing what is necessary to be transformed and to win the war.
Yeah. Thanks for the comment.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's an argument. It's really an argument or an advocacy to say, look, on my great release chart where I was talking about getting ready for the reorganization, you're really arguing that we need to move the thing back to where the release is and say we need more strategic action inside of the release itself. I don't necessarily disagree. And I think there's a way to do it, but it's not the purpose of what I was trying to outline in terms of this paper and what the movement needs to do to get ready for handling the meta-crisis. But you're not wrong to point out that history is contingent. There is nothing that says that we get to a reorganization of an up-leveling if the structures, significantly degrade past a release. And yeah, that is certainly true. But what we would do is we would then look at that context as its own initiative or set of initiatives, and we'd say, what are the most powerful things that the integrative worldview could bring to create a prophylactic for through the release phase and then support, better outcomes. And that would have to be its own kind of its own kind of analytical process and thinking about it and thinking about where are the real pressure points, et cetera. What we can rely on is that the worldviews are going to react to each other, and there's gonna be a massive amount of resistance. And we can read that landscape, I think, pretty well in terms of how this is gonna play out and what some of the key levers are gonna be, where some of the key the resistance points, and also if the dam breaks, it'll break at some places that are identifiable in terms of some SCOTUS decisions and some other things that we can identify. Anyway, so all of that to say that, yes, I hear you. And that is it's not unfair to advocate that that's true. But again, as you can hear from this call, take a deep breath. This is, you take all of this input. It's go ahead and boil the ocean. 15 people or 500 people or whatever with no resources boil the ocean. Yeah, it's a lot. And so we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that it's possible that some of the remedies that we're actually looking for that are emergent might actually come from the lower levels survival, from the people who survive, and what's left if it goes really, really bad, then whatever is left after survival, those remedies will be necessarily coming from those people and whatever they have available to them. I don't know, it might be myself, because this is happening so fast that I might actually be alive I might actually see it, so, and certainly my children and grandchildren. So, yeah.
Yeah, we have talked about assembling and there are other versions of this already out there, but basically eco-village, a resilient eco-village, global eco-village network that the Institute would give visibility to for exactly that reason. That you basically, I was in a conversation recently with a donor who said, we have got to make sure that integrative knowledge survives any catastrophic breakdown. And so how do we put that, how do we protect that and put it into a resilient network worldwide? So that is a conversation we're having. I know we're over time. I'm happy to keep going. So everybody just sort of drop off if you want. We'll try to go through the questions as fast as we can. Hi, Kathleen.
Hi. Well, I have a really short question, which is, can you share an email address or some way that people can give you back some other information other than this forum?
Sure.
And
Yeah,
I've read the paper, but I have to read it again and translate it because it's sort of operating at a vocabulary level way over my head. My background is project management, so I'm happy to help with things that are about helping people do stuff.
awesome. We need project managers.
Yes.
Thank
And
you.
it involves using much simpler language, like simple commands. So, at one point I was a procedure writer for a large brokerage house, and we had to translate everything down to 8th grade reading level. And we used Fleisch Kincaid tools to force ourselves down, because what we needed people to do was be able to read this and know exactly what to do without having to stop and really go into, a deep, full brain immersion zone to be able to,
Yes.
metabolize it,
Do
or the
this.
rest of us would just say, understand it.
Do this by this time.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
And if you can put that call out to people, I think you're going to get a lot more response from people who say, here's what I can contribute.
Yeah.
If this is scary. And I don't mean scary like, all the stuff I'm watching on the news, which is a different kind of scary. This is scary and like, oh my God, how do I digest all of this and contribute to it? Yeah, I mean, Gurdjieff said we don't change until we hit a shock point, which is your, crisis. And if we get through the next decade without a world war, it will be because something miraculous happened. And it may not look like the last couple we've had, but it's not going to be pretty. And so this is very crucial that there's a real urgency to getting this done, because this is one of the things that's going to enable us to survive, like keep breathing. I mean, I want this information, this model to survive too. But yeah, we need actual breathing humans to make that work.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Kathleen. Hi, Dreama.
Hey, how's it going, Rob?
Good, how are you?
Thank you for hosting this. I go by Amir Ahmed Nasser. A few of you might be aware of my work in integral Sufism. I've worked with Ken Wilber in the past, Terry Patton, may he rest in peace, and several others in the movement. I appreciate you putting this together, Rob, because you don't subscribe to a viewpoint that is actively skewed. I can tell from your work that you're always doing your best to be integrative in your thinking and to even explore points of view that you might not like, that you might strongly disagree with. I appreciate what you brought up, and this is really my question. It has to do with what you brought up earlier, this phrase, fertility for transformation, or transformational fertility. There is so much well-intentioned work that goes on in the integral space that, from my experience, almost 2 decades now, doesn't have the efficacy it could, because it's aiming in the wrong places where there is no fertility. And sometimes the fertility is counterintuitive. I've been in Congress. I've dealt with senior U.S. leaders in national security. I've done work in intelligence. I'm a veteran of intelligence. I've met people as seniors, Senator John McCain after he ran for president. There's Carter Phipps doing interesting work, Steve McIntosh doing interesting work. There's the Heterodox Academy with Jonathan Haidt, who's not integral per se explicitly, but he is integrally informed. And so my question is how do you advocate for this transformational fertility in counterintuitive places where, for instance, we may need to wage a third world war? We may need to engage in red meme aspects, spiral dynamics wise, that might not be palatable, for someone who's very much in the green meme. I used to be that way. the reason the GOP won is because they were able to point towards, things where there was a lot of fertility that the left did not want to look at. And they were willing to do so in ways that shockingly brought Trump back in power. And so if we're going to double down on not wanting to see these areas where the fertility exists, and we could do brilliant work, I fear that we're going to remain in theoretical conversations. And what I know about you is that you're a practical person who's also a philosopher. And so I know it's a long-winded sort of introduction to myself and what I've been up to in the question. But succinctly, how do you point towards transformational fertility in places where people don't want to look at, and it's counterintuitive?
I think we have to be willing to look at any problem or any area of the world and see how there is an innate desire to transform to something, because there are people that are dissatisfied, and that is something that we can hope to serve, but also by helping it to transform, maybe leverage it in a way that is powerful and sort of strategically transformative for the world. I think the best political parties and the best political strategists do some version of this because they have to. They have to see where the energy is, and then speak to it, and then transmute it into concrete action and what have you. So like I said, I think we actually need a political project for sure. I don't think there's anything that's off limits. I don't think there's any aspect of any domain that's off limits. In the transformational stack that is the Institute's initiative strategy, it goes from the very concrete warrior worldviews and opportunities for transformation in those all the way up the stack. And so when we think about our strategy, we think about it in three-dimensional terms, actually to some degree in fourth-dimensional terms, because we think about it both synchronically today and diachronically over time. Like what does transformation look like over time? But you're thinking about it in terms of this evolutionary stack of being and worldviews, and you're looking at it saying, what is the most important thing? Like, just to be crude about it, what's the single most important thing we could transform at Red today on the world stage? That's an important question. We should have a strategy around that. We should be working on it. If we don't have $1 million dedicated to that and some awesome leaders, we're not doing our job. We're asleep. And that's true for about 50 things. We should be doing it because now you can think about it not just in terms of the structures, the emergent layers or worldviews. You can think about it in terms of lines, which we also do, right? So our evolutionary stack of initiatives also has lines like, okay, ultimate concern, social organizational models, tools, et cetera, right? So you can then think about it in terms of lines. Now, again, a lot of this feels like boil the ocean because it is, right? Because if you're going to release the energy of a movement, then you need to have a way of sense making collectively that allows that movement to see what the movement is doing. Otherwise, you end up in sense making anarchy where nobody knows what anybody is doing, and there's no integrative to your pluralism. And so this is what we're attempting to accomplish with not just the Institute as a microcosm, but also some toolkit that would visualize what an overall global stack strategy looks like. And we have a strategic meta-crisis mapping initiative underway to do exactly this and put it online in a mapping way that then could associate projects with it that align with all the various dimensionalities of the meta-crisis the world over. Just to use one example, because I've been reading Ibn Arabi, and you mentioned Sufism, like I've been thinking a lot about the fact that your best demographic situation on the whole planet, like the entire planet economically, is in a little bit of trouble because of its demographics. China's got problematic demographics. Japan does. Russia's are terrible. Europe's are screwed up. America's is getting there. Your best demographics on the planet are in Africa. So if you don't have an African strategy, you're asleep. one of the major sort of financial and governance power centers for what's emerging in Africa runs through the Middle East. It runs through Dubai. They have unlimited amounts of money. So when I think about a transformational strategy that takes advantage of this set of context, I immediately think, how could you go in and in a transformationally fertile way solve some problem for them that is a steering problem that probably associates with them wanting to leverage Africa contra the Europe, US, and China in such a way that plants a whole new level of seeds that could become integral flowers over the next generation. Again, if we're not thinking about this stuff, we're asleep. And this is what we need. But we need leaders to then go play that out, because there's only a finite amount of time and attention and energy that any one of us has. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of how I think about it. I see no more hands. Did we do it? All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Hopefully this was helpful. Look forward to any further feedback you have, and keep the conversation going. Appreciate all your love and support. If you're not core members of Integral Life yet, that is one way, very simple way you could support, is become a core member. It's a new membership level that it helps support the guys that do a lot of the hard work behind the scenes. So with that, I will say goodbye and appreciate you very much. Thank you.